Welcome to the Power of Peacefulness podcast. We're all about bringing peace into your life. If you like this podcast, do me a favor, give it a thumbs up. And if you need some extra help, go ahead and download my free resource. You can find that at Sharon McLaughlin, MD/workbook. It's a workbook all about peacefulness. So if you need some peace in your life, try the workbook. All right, let's get started. Hey, everybody. Today we have Dr. Karolina Skrzypek with us. She is going to be speaking about hormones and what we can do to help balance our hormones. Dr. Karolina, she is boarded in internal medicine and also integrative medicine. We'll hear more about her business and how she's helping others. Dr. Karolina, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Sharon. This is a pleasure.
Tell me how you got started. You're practicing in internal medicine, and how did you end up narrowing down into this field of hormones and meditation, mindfulness, integrative medicine?
Sure. So this type of work started for me when I was on faculty at the University of Michigan. I was working as a really busy hospitalist, seeing lots of patients. I was getting close to 100 pages, every few hours on my pager. And I really started seeing that a lot of the patients that were coming into the hospital were the same patients, and they were coming in with chronic conditions that were not being addressed, maybe to the best extent that they could be in the outpatient setting. They were also developing side effects from a lot of the medications that we were placing them on. And I wanted to find a way that I could treat these patients more naturally, and also that I could prevent a lot of the symptoms and side effects and a lot of, the things that were happening to them outside of the hospital before they even came into the hospital. So what I started doing was being the, evidence-based type of scientific, physician, as many of us are. I started looking to the literature, and I said, I know there's some alternative therapies out there. I've heard that they may work, they may not, but let me see what the evidence shows. So I started digging into the evidence, started reading the research studies, and started finding a lot of legitimate research that backs up alternative and complementary type of therapies for a lot of the conditions that we treat. And so when I started finding that, I said, well, I want to learn even more. So how do I learn more about this? Is there some education that I can do on this? How do I get better at this? And ironically enough, almost the next day after I started doing this research and started becoming more interested in treating patients more naturally and holistically, we had a didactic session that we had every noon, working as a faculty hospitalist. And the topic for that day was mindfulness. And it was by she's a PhD of psychology, Dr. Rita Ben at the University of Michigan. She led a mindfulness session with us. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, I'm getting all these pages. The phone is going off the hook. How am I going to take out an hour from my day to, do a meditation or mindfulness session? I didn't know that much about it. And I actually went through the meditation. I stuck through it, and I came out of that session feeling so much better. I felt so refreshed. I had more energy. I felt more centered, more grounded, and really ready to take on the work that the rest of the day had for me. So within like a matter of days, I came to the realization that I wanted to treat patients more naturally, more holistically, that there is evidence for that, and that there are programs, that you can take out there to learn more about it and use that to enhance, your clinical practice. And I also went through a mindfulness session, which personally, changed the way that I started to approach everything in life. And so that led me to then complete a faculty scholars program in integrative medicine at the University of Michigan. And then I went on to complete a fellowship at the University of Arizona, the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine. And that was really, just the beginning of my journey.
Thank you so much for that. Talking about the mind-body connection, tell us what you know about it, or for the women out there that are listening, what would you say? Tell us the important points that we should know about the mind-body connection.
Absolutely. So, when it comes to addressing things like our hormones or maybe other imbalances that could be driving our hormone imbalances, like our gut, our thyroid hormones, aside from just female hormones, there is a lot that we can do with the physical things. Of course, we can work on the gut. We can figure out if the thyroid, hormones are affecting female hormones. We can measure female hormones. But the mind is also very important in controlling what happens in our body. So I tell my patients, to a certain degree, we can optimize things in the body. We can figure out what's happening. We can treat that more naturally. But the mind also controls a lot of the things, the processes that happen in our body. And we need that extra support from our mind being in the right space, from us, at times being a little bit calmer or, making sure that that is taken care of as well, so that everything that we're doing with the physical things is optimized as well as it can be. Um, so one thing that I often really like to use is biofeedback to explain how the mind and body are connected, because you can use, for example, your thoughts to control certain processes that happen in your body, such as your heart rate, your breathing rate, your respiratory rate, and vice versa. You can actually adjust your respiratory rate. You can adjust, the way that you're sitting or the things that you're doing day to day to then affect how your mind functions. So that connection is real. It's validated and it goes both ways.
Give us an example of that.
Yeah. So one of the examples of using that connection is breath work, for example. So there are certain breathing techniques that you can use where you control your rate of breathing. And the idea is that you spend a little bit longer in taking in the breath and holding your breath. So that causes your carbon dioxide levels to rise in your blood. And that in turn starts to trigger your parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest nervous system. And then that triggers other things in your body, such as your heart rate slowing down. You tend to feel less anxious. You feel more calm. So just by, using something like breath work where you're controlling your rate of breathing, that can affect your mind. And then that in turn affects the rest of your body. So that's just one connection, or example of that mind-body connection.
Before you had mentioned hormones. Talk to us about some of the most common hormone imbalances that you see or how we approach those.
Yeah, so some of the most common hormonal imbalances are things such as progesterone imbalance. So there's something called luteal phase defect, and this is where during the second part of our menstrual cycle, progesterone tends to rise and then decrease. But in some women, that process doesn't happen like it should. For example, the progesterone can not rise enough, or it can rise too much, or it can come down very quickly. And what happens is if a woman is very sensitive to those hormonal changes, then she's going to develop a lot of symptoms from that. So, for example, headaches, anxiety, mood disorders, insomnia, just from having that type of what we call luteal phase defect in the second part of her menstrual cycle.
Talking about hormones, what are some natural ways rather than using medications that we could help with our hormone balance?
Yeah, so there's many things that we can do actually that are aside from medications, and there's a whole spectrum of natural and alternative treatments, starting with things such as mind-body therapies. So doing yoga, meditation, mindfulness, breath work, even, using mindfulness with things like how we're eating our food, because that affects our hormones as well. So there's all of those types of techniques. But also, we have to understand that our hormones are connected to everything else that happens in our body. So they're connected to our thyroid, they're connected to our gut, they're connected to our cardiovascular health. And so also addressing those things will in turn help to rebalance your hormones. And the way that we address things like the gut, for example, is we look for imbalances and we try to treat those imbalances naturally. So, for example, if there's an overgrowth of bacteria or not the right balance of bacteria, that could actually affect something called the estrobolome, which is a whole process that happens in our gut that metabolizes estrogen. And so by, tackling that, even though it doesn't seem like we're directly treating estrogen or other hormone imbalances, we do in fact treat how our body balances estrogen, because estrogen is processed by certain bacteria in our gut, and then it's either recirculated in our body or it's, excreted in other ways. So by focusing on your gut, also getting your thyroid hormones in balance, making sure that, your cholesterol's in balance, all of those things play into our hormones, and all of those things can be investigated and treated naturally.
Talk to me as far as the testing if someone comes into you. Do you do a broad panel testing? Is it specific based on their clinical symptoms? What's your approach? And ladies, this is general information, medical information. This is not individual treatment.
Yes, thank you, Sharon, for mentioning that. So when somebody comes into me as a new patient, there are certain tests that all of our patients get because I do focus more on women's health. And I found that there are certain tests that are just integral and necessary for me to understand what is happening inside of a woman's body and how to piece all of those things together. So I do hormone urine testing. I do urine testing to look at things like the metabolism and whether maybe there are some imbalances, environmental toxin imbalances, or other type of mold imbalances, for example. I also do food sensitivity testing, and we also do something called a GI map test that looks at all the entire microbiome. So all the good bacteria, the bad bacteria, inflammatory markers. And then what we do is we piece all of those hundreds of pieces of information together, and we come up with a personalized treatment plan based on those initial tests. So to answer your question, Sharon, yeah, everybody at the beginning does get all of those tests. Sometimes I do make exceptions if I find that, there's something that has to be changed for a specific situation. But in general, those are the tests that we like to start off with.
We'll get into how people can get a hold of you in a little bit. But for those who are not going to work with you, what would be some advice that you could give to them or some tips where they could start working on the mind body connection? You've listed quite a few. What do you think they could start implementing today?
Yeah. So, what I would start with first and foremost is coming up with some kind of a ritual or tradition, or something that you do every day for yourself, where you incorporate some mind body work. And what I recommend for a lot of my patients is in the morning when you first wake up, making sure you're opening your shutters and you're looking directly at sunlight, because that stimulates your circadian rhythm, and it stimulates how your melatonin circulates throughout the day. It stimulates how cortisol circulates throughout the day. If you want to make that even more powerful, go outside and do some grounding where you just step on, the soil, the grass outside to ground yourself. And then I really recommend going for a walk or doing some sort of light cardio activity. So by doing all of those things, you're getting sunlight, which is going to stimulate your vitamin D. You're also stimulating those circadian rhythms. You're grounding yourself. And then on top of that, while you're going for this brisk walk, I recommend listening to the Calm app. I really like that app because there's a lot of mindfulness and meditation practices on there that you can do. And so that way you're getting all of these things. You're getting the vitamins, the vitamin D that you need. You're getting the circadian rhythm going. You're grounding yourself. And you're also starting to do some of those mindfulness and meditation practices at the same time.
Talk to me as far as literally putting your bare feet on the grass. Does it matter?
So yes, it does matter. There is a term called grounding that we like to use. And by doing that, you're connecting yourself to the earth. And that also starts to stimulate what's called your vagus nerve and your parasympathetic nervous system. And it helps to balance your cortisol. A lot of times nowadays, a lot of us women, we wear high heels, or we don't spend a lot of time outdoors because we're so busy in our clinics or in whatever job that we have. And so taking some time just to connect with nature and to ground ourselves to the earth is really important and helps to balance out all of those processes in our body.
Karolina, for the people that are out there that want to hear more about what you offer, how do they get a hold of you?
Sure. So you could go to our website, www.naturamed.org, naturamed.org, or you can email our team@naturamed.org. You can also follow us on Instagram or on Facebook. I post a lot of educational videos and content on there just to show my patients or future patients, the type of work that we do. So those are the best ways to get a hold of us and our team.
You also have a free resource on your website for our listeners. Could you mention that?
Yes. So I do have a free perimenopause guide on my website. You can download that. And there's also a lot of natural techniques, including mind body techniques, that I have included in that resource so that you can start implementing some of the things that we talked about today right away and start seeing a difference in your health right away.
Dr. Karolina, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Sharon. This was a pleasure.